Life Audio.
Nobody gets pregnant or adopts and goes, oh, I know, someday I will be calling the police on this sweet little child and watching them handcuffed, put in the back of a cop car. I mean, it's just the most, I still get teary-eyed just talking about it. It's the most heart-wrenching thing. I was so desperate in that moment. I knew that the situation, and it's too long to get into the whole story, but I knew that the situation was out of my control. And so there were so many layers of this, a layer of how did we get to this point? And then of course that comes with self-criticism. What did you do? What did you not do? Why can't you control your child? You know, all that stuff. And then there's just so much pain. It's like anger at yourself and pain and fear of what the future holds. Like if this is what we're doing and he's only 15, what's next?
Welcome to the Faith Over Fear podcast, where we discuss powerful truths, quiet anxiety, and fear, big and small. We are passionate about helping God's children experience soul-deep emotional and spiritual freedom. And we want to inspire you to share that freedom with others. We would love to connect with you online or to come speak at your next event. Visit our show notes to learn how to connect with us. I'm Jennifer Slattery, and I know the anguish of watching a loved one struggle with significant mental health challenges. I know the drive to try to fix them or their situation, and I know the pain that comes when my fear and my anxiety lead me to behave in unhelpful ways. And considering in the United States, over 21 million adults and 15% of our youth between the ages of 12 and 15 experience major depression, I suspect many of you can relate. And I hope and I pray that this episode with author and comedian Kristina Kuzmic brings you encouragement, hope, and practical insights regarding how you can love your depressed loved one well. Kristina, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Kristina Kuzmic was born in Croatia and is a world-renowned speaker known for her unique insight and humor on family-related topics. She currently lives in Southern California with her husband, where her most important, rewarding, and exhausting careers include being a sanitation engineer, a chef, a chauffeur, and conflict resolution guru for her three mostly satisfied clients, her children. In her book, I Can Fix This and Other Lies I Told Myself While Parenting My Struggling Child, she shares her raw and honest journey walking beside her son as he battled major depression. And her testimony reveals a mother who felt lost, scared, and desperate to save her son. With full transparency, Kuzmic delves deep into her family's challenges, her insecurities, and the mistakes she made while revealing invaluable lessons and the small changes that made a big difference. Featuring an urgent and affirming foreword by New York Times best-selling clinician Dr. Shefali Sabari, I Can Fix This debunks 10 parenting truths that kept Kristina and her family in crises. Kristina, I really appreciate you being here. I know this is a challenging, a really intense topic, especially for listeners right now who are right in the throes of it. And in your book, you talked about what a sweet and gentle child Luca was. So your son, Luca, was, but you began to notice his behavior change when he was nearing his teen years, correct?
Yeah. So he was just like this full of life kid, hyper, very creative. He just was sunshine. That's the only way I can describe it. And then around 12, 13, I started seeing some changes and I thought, oh, I know exactly what this is. This is teenage stuff. Like, because I had been a teenager, obviously, we've all survived that. And also right out of college, I worked as an assistant theater director at a high school and worked with teenagers for a long time. And so I just thought I'd mastered this whole teen thing. And I guess that's one of the first mistakes I made is I came from a place of assumption. I see his behavior. I know what this is. I know how to handle it, instead of coming from a place of curiosity and really from the beginning realizing there's a deeper issue here.
And so you initially just thought he was being moody, but then you started to recognize it was maybe something more was going on. Like, walk us through that.
Sure. I started to notice moodiness, and he didn't want to be around me as much. And he's starting to rebel a little bit and he's starting to talk back. And then I realized, again, to me, it was like, oh, he's just he's excelling at being a teenager. Let's put it that way. maybe being a little extra teenagery more than other teenagers, but that's it. And then I realized, oh, wait, he's not just isolating from me, he's isolating from his friends. He's isolating from everything that used to bring him joy, hobbies, sports. He has like nothing brings him joy anymore. And that's when I was like, and also just the behavior escalated so quickly. He was on the honor roll now. He was failing classes. There was just like these big changes that made me realize this is much more serious than just teenage hormones.
So I actually listened to another one of your interviews from back, I don't know when it aired, but where you were talking about your time as a single mom
Mhm.
and how you yourself during that season experienced depression. Do you feel like that season maybe helped you a bit, like your perspective when your son was going through his own struggle?
You know what? It did both actually. In some ways, it hurt it because depression shows up differently for different people. And so a lot of times, again, came from a place of assumption because I've been through this. I know what he's feeling. I know what he's going through. But no, it's different. And, some people, some kids show depression by overachieving and being that quote unquote good kid in the family. Depression can show up so many different ways. And not only does it show up different ways, but different people need different things. I always say that parenting is not like riding a bike. Just because you have your first kid is a bike and you got to figure out like, oh, the second one will be easy. I know how to operate this thing. Well, the second one will not be a bike. The second one will be a tractor. You're going to have to learn from scratch. I feel same is true with mental health, right? Just because something works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for the next. And so in some ways it hurt the situation because I came from a place of assumption. And in some ways later, once I was done with that mistake, it helped because I understood what it feels like to not be able to get out of bed. And it's not just laziness. And I struggled with that even as a parent watching him. It was like, oh my gosh, why is he so lazy? And then I'd go, wait, were you lazy when you were struggling to get out of bed? So I guess it did both.
Yeah. And you also shared how when his behavior began to intensify, which I felt like this was so helpful for maybe listeners to hear, but you volleyed between denial and fear. So what was kind of driving your fear and then driving denial and why do you think you kind of bounced between the two?
Yeah, I compare it to like two politicians wanting my vote, denial and fear. And I'm like trying to figure out who to vote for. And it was constantly, oh, I found out he's vaping. Denial would be like, oh, whatever. Teenagers do that. And then fear was like, oh my gosh, what's next? If he's vaping now, he's going to be doing Coke next. It was constantly that kind of stuff. Oh, he's failing some classes. Yeah, well, your grades dropped a little bit too when you were in high school. And then fear being like, he's going to be a high school dropout and be on the streets and in prison. And I think that's very relatable to a lot of parents who are suddenly seeing these big changes. There's a part of you that just wants to believe it's all normal and it's going to be okay. It's like we're comforting ourselves with that, right? And then there's a part of you that is freaking out. And a lot of that is because, oh my goodness, I don't have any control over this. Like I'm trying all these different things and it's not helping. And so trying to not give in to either of those and just deal with reality can be really, really hard.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, and this was something I loved in your book. Actually, I think that I want to implement in every conversation, but you emphasize the importance of approaching conversations from a place of curiosity. So, what might this look like, whether you're a parent with a teen struggling with depression, or maybe it's your sibling, or maybe it's your spouse? What would it look like to approach them from a place of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, we all have our preconceived ideas and we all have our, oh, I know what would help this situation, or well, I know someone who's been through it, or I've been through it, so I know what they're going. We all have this stuff. Or again, like I was, well, he's being a moody teenager. We have to sort of completely put all of that aside. You cannot come from a place of curiosity if you've already decided what the situation is and what it needs. And a lot of us, our generation, has been taught because the way we were raised that a parent is supposed to know what to do in all situations. A parent sees a problem and they can solve the problem. That's a good parent. No, a good parent is a student because the only expert at being Luca was Luca. And as much as my ego was telling me that I know what's best for him, I needed to learn more than I needed to yap, right? So coming from a place of curiosity means putting all of that aside and just listening in a way where you listen without knowing what you want to ask next, or already thinking how you want to fix it, or already trying to argue their feeling because that's not really what they feel. But all that stuff needs to be put aside. I think one of the most beautiful things we can tell somebody who is opening up to us, whether it's our child or spouse or whoever, is tell me more. That's it. Tell me more. I want to learn. Not only I want to learn because you're the only expert, but also as a parent, we're teaching our kids to trust themselves. I trust that what you're feeling is real. I trust that you will know what you need. I want to support and I want to guide, but I need to learn. So curiosity is sort of that complete blank slate and just sitting the way I write in the book, learning to stand in awe of Luca's story. Not what I think his story should be, not what I wished it would be, not what the world said it would be, not even what he wishes it would be. Even he. What is it? Standing in awe of his story.
Well, what I hear in that too is assuming the best in your child. I think it's easy when you have a teen to, oh, well, they're rude or they're entitled or they're lazy. What I'm hearing from you is you can't be curious without assuming the best in them as well. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times we look at our kids' behavior and then we come from a place of fear because we don't want to raise entitled, awful human beings, right? And so we're like, okay, we got to just nip this in the butt and fix it. And I don't believe that there really are bad kids. I think the kids are in pain. So if every single thing your child does that in your eyes is negative behavior, and it can be something little or it can be something really big and dangerous. What if you saw them as a child who is in need, in pain, right? Every behavior is communicating a need or a want. And I think for me, just making that switch, and I had to remind myself in the moments, he would punch a hole in the wall or he would scream in my face. And by the way, I'm not saying any of that should just be like, okay, well, he's struggling, so he can do whatever. No, no. But if I immediately decided, okay, no, Kristina, see him as a child in pain, in need, I was able to approach it differently. I was able to speak to him differently. And it actually made those changes that we want, where we're teaching our child not to have a certain behavior, not to repeat certain negative behavior, right? So just having that compassion. I mean, it's what we would want for us, right? We've all done stupid stuff and we've all made mistakes and we still do into our adulthood. What if we were immediately by somebody in charge labeled as, okay, you're bad, you're rebellious, instead of, hey, tell me more. Why? Why did you do that? I genuinely, I want to know where that came from. That's a very different approach.
Yeah. Do you think that helped dial your fear down, your anxiety down as well when you shifted to curiosity?
I would say that my fear was so out of control. I don't know that it helped my actual deep, deep fear, but it helped me be able to talk to him calmly. This is what it did. It didn't eliminate the fear, but it made me more in control of the fear instead of the fear being in control of me, if that makes sense.
That's powerful. Tell us about when things began and to escalate. I know there was one part in your book where, I mean, your heart had to have been shredded when you had to call the authorities on your son. What was that like? What was going on?
Nobody gets pregnant or adopts and goes, oh, I know, someday I will be calling the police on this sweet little child and watching them handcuffed, put in the back of a cop car. I mean, it's just the most, I still get teary eyed just talking about it. It's the most heart wrenching thing. I was so desperate in that moment. I knew that the situation, and it's too long to get into the whole story, but I knew that the situation was out of my control. And so there were so many layers of this, a layer of how did we get to this point? And then, of course, that comes with self criticism. What did you do? What did you not do? Why can't you control your child? All that stuff. And then there's just so much pain. It's like anger at yourself and pain and fear of what the future holds. Like, if this is what we're doing and he's only 15, what's next? Right? It's just one of the worst things. But Luca, my son, who actually wrote the last chapter of the book, he to this day says, Mom, you did what you needed to do. And it was the first sort of turning point. People always ask me, what was the turning point? There were many. This was the first sort of like, okay, this requires way more intense help than I'm able to offer, or once a week therapist is able to offer, or whatever.
One thing I really loved about your whole story, at every section, I saw that you were getting help. It seemed like you got help from your husband, the support there. You put your son in therapy, and then you actually saw a therapist, correct, to get guidance. And then when you needed a higher level help. So I would say to those listening, sometimes I think we pull away from that out of shame maybe or guilt or whatever, and instead of reaching out and getting the help that we need. I'm really curious during that time. So you already mentioned how your fear and the pain and the anguish, what are some things you did just to maintain your own sanity?
It was hard at the time because how do you even find time to think about your own needs, right? During the night, I would go and check on him in the middle of the night, multiple times every night. You know how when you have a newborn and they're so still when they're sleeping, and so a lot of us would put our face close to their face just to feel their breath. I was doing this to my son when he was 15, 16, 17, going into his room just to make sure he hadn't taken his life. So when you're living that life, and by the way, I have two other kids that have completely separate needs and things, right? And I have in-laws who live down the street that we're trying to help with things. And I have a marriage and I have a career. It is so easy to just forget about ourselves.